My son-in-law's family mocked me as a poor mother at the wedding. One call changed everything. Welcome back with a new real shock story. Before we start, comment and tell me which city you're watching from. At the end, don't forget to subscribe and rate it from 0 to 10. Let's enjoy the story, everyone.
Began on a day I thought would be beautiful. My sister's wedding. A day full of laughter, dresses, flowers, and promises of a new life. I was wearing my favorite dress, my heart light and full. I was so happy for her. She'd been dreaming of this day for years, but nothing could have prepared me for what was about to unfold. That day was supposed to be about joy. Instead, it became something I can never forget. I remember stepping into the grand hall, the air filled with music, chatter, and the scent of fresh roses. Guests were smiling, cameras clicking. Everyone seemed to glow. But then, across the hall, I saw them. My sister's husband's family. They were whispering, glancing toward my mother. I couldn't hear their words at first, but the smirks and sideways glances told me something was wrong. My heart started to tighten without reason. As the ceremony began, I noticed it more clearly. The way they looked at her, not with kindness, but with mockery. They whispered too loudly for it to be accidental. They laughed quietly at something she said, and I could see her face fall. My mother, who had spent her whole life giving everything for us, now stood there small, humiliated, in front of hundreds of people. I wanted to rush to her side, to tell them to stop, but my feet felt frozen. My throat was dry. I just watched. That's when I heard the cruel words, sharp and loud enough to carry. She looks poor. She doesn't belong here. My stomach twisted. My mother's hands tightened around her clutch bag. She smiled faintly, but her eyes were filled with hurt. Everyone around seemed to hear. Gasps floated across the room. My sister froze. I could almost feel her heart pounding too. The bride was about to walk into her happiest day, and here was this shadow, a thorn ripping through it. I kept telling myself it must be a mistake. Maybe I imagined it. But then came the whispers, again, louder this time. She shouldn't be here. Why bring her? They weren't talking about some stranger. They were talking about my mother, the woman who raised me, the woman who had given me everything without complaint. My heart was racing. I felt an unbearable mix of shame, anger, and confusion. I wanted to step forward, to defend her, but another feeling stopped me. It was a strange kind of dread, a sense that whatever happened next could change everything. My mother, in her usual gentle way, stayed quiet, but her lips trembled. I could see her holding back tears. I wanted to reach out, but before I could move, something happened that I couldn't have predicted. She lifted her phone, slowly, deliberately, as if she had rehearsed this moment her whole life. She pressed a number and spoke softly into it. I didn't hear her words, but the reaction was instant. The mocking whispers stopped. People turned their heads. A few guests even gasped. My sister looked at her, confused. My mother didn't speak loudly, but her voice carried in a strange way. Calm, powerful, certain. It was the kind of voice that makes you stop and listen, no matter what. The tension in the hall was like a living thing. Everyone was waiting. No one dared speak. My stomach felt heavy, and my hands began to shake. I could see my mother's eyes scanning the room, full of courage and something I couldn't name. I realized this was more than just about her. This call, whatever it was, had the power to change something far deeper than a wedding argument. And then she said something that made my heart stop. Something so shocking that the whole room seemed to hold its breath. I wanted to lean in closer, to hear every word, but I couldn't. I was frozen. All I knew was that this moment would not end the way anyone expected, and I had no idea if it would bring justice, shame, or something worse. That day began Egan as a dream, a day of love and celebration. But by the time the music stopped, something had shifted forever, and I was left wondering, what would happen next? What did my mother say in that call? And how would it change all of us? This isn't just a wedding story. It's something more. It's about pride, pain, and a truth no one was ready to face. And it's a story I have to tell, because it happened to me, and it's still happening now. The room was silent after my mother's call. Even the music had stopped, like it didn't dare to play over the tension. Everyone stared, some with curiosity, others with shock. I could feel my own heart pounding so hard it seemed to echo in my ears. My sister stood frozen, her wedding bouquet clutched tightly in her hands. The bridegroom's family looked uneasy, shuffling in place as if the air had suddenly turned heavier. I wanted to move toward my mother, to ask what was going on, but something inside me whispered not to. Instead, I stayed where I was, watching her. She didn't lower her phone. She spoke quietly again, words I couldn't hear, but her voice had that same quiet power, the kind that makes people lean in without realizing. I could see heads turn, people whispering to each other now. My stomach twisted. I knew this was no ordinary wedding drama. Later, I learned what she said. It was a single sentence, but it carried weight. A few guests later told me she said something that revealed a truth no one expected, something about respect, dignity, and a promise of change. I wished I had heard it in real time. Instead, I could only imagine the courage it took for her to speak. After that call, things began to shift. My mother put her phone away slowly, her face calm but determined. Her shoulders straightened, as though she'd been carrying a weight she had finally set down. A silence stretched through the hall that was heavier than any noise, and then, without warning, the murmurs began again. But this time, they were different. Not cruel, but uneasy. I could see my sister's husband glance toward my mother with a flicker of guilt in his eyes. Her mocking relatives looked away, their laughter gone. It was as if something had broken in them, though I didn't yet know what. The air was charged, almost electric. It felt like a turning point, something irreversible. But before anyone could speak, the ceremony continued. The music returned, softer this time, almost reluctant. Guests shifted in their seats. My mother stayed seated at the far side of the hall, her hands folded in her lap, watching quietly. I wanted to go to her, to tell her she was brave, to ask why she had done it. But the moment had passed, and deep down, I felt something rising inside me, a mix of anger and pride I couldn't put into words. Later that evening, when the wedding was winding down, I found her standing alone in the garden. The moonlight touched her face, making her look even more serene, almost untouchable. I approached slowly, afraid I'd break something sacred. "Mom, what happened today?" I asked softly. My voice trembled, not just with emotion, but because I didn't want her to say what I feared she might. She looked at me without speaking for a long moment. Then she whispered, "They think they can decide a person's worth by money. They think that mockery is harmless, but it is not. Alec, sometimes you have to stand silent until the right moment to speak becomes clear." I just spoke mine. Her words struck me harder than anything I'd ever heard. She was right. I'd been so focused on the moment that I didn't realize this was about more than just her. It was about a lifetime of judgment, about unfairness, about a world where people are still looked down on for reasons they can't control. As we stood there in silence, I began to understand that this was only the beginning. What happened at that wedding wasn't just an insult or an argument. It was a spark, and sparks, no matter how small, can ignite fires that change everything. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying every moment. The laughter, the whispers, my mother's trembling lips, her calm voice on the phone. I wondered what would happen next. Would they apologize? Would they change? Or would they ignore it and pretend it never happened? I had no answer, but I knew one thing for certain. Something inside me had shifted too. I felt a strange mix of fear and determination, as if I had stepped through a door I couldn't close again. The next morning, I woke to find the wedding pictures already circulating online, but not the ones of smiles and flowers. This was different. There were pictures of my mother, sitting quietly at the wedding table, her face unreadable, her phone in hand. Captions whispered about the incident and the call. My chest tightened. Suddenly, this wasn't just a private moment anymore. It was public. People began talking. Some sided with my mother. Others criticized her. But no one could stop asking the same question. What did she say in that call? And what would happen because of it? I didn't know the answer. But as I sat in my room scrolling through the comments, a thought kept echoing in my mind. This story wasn't over. Not for her, not for me, not for anyone who had watched it unfold. And I realized, with a strange certainty, that I was now part of something far bigger than a wedding. Something that would change everything. And somewhere deep inside, I knew I had to tell the rest of this story. The days after the wedding felt strange, as if time had slowed, but the world around me was spinning faster. Everyone seemed to be whispering. At school, at home, even at the grocery store. People who barely knew me would look away or stare just a little too long. It was like my life had been pulled into a story I hadn't chosen to tell, but couldn't escape. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. Every time I looked at my phone, there were more comments, more messages, screenshots of my mother's face at the wedding. The caption, "What did she say?" over and over again. My mother, who had never been one to speak out, had suddenly become the center of something huge, and I was caught in the middle of it. At first, I wanted to just block it out, pretend nothing happened, but every time I saw her face, quiet, calm, unshaken, I knew I couldn't. I needed to understand. I needed to know why she had done it. One afternoon, I found her in the kitchen, her tea cooling beside her untouched. She looked tired, but her eyes were steady. I sat across from her. "Mom," I said softly, "I can't stop thinking about that night. Why did you call him? Why now?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she poured herself more tea, her hands shaking slightly. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, almost a whisper. "I've lived my life seeing how people judge others without knowing them. I've stayed quiet too many times. Today, I couldn't." I could see the weight of her words. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was years of quiet pain, of watching her and others treated unfairly because of where they came from, how much money they had, or who they were. I had never realized how deep it ran for her. That night, I decided I couldn't ignore what happened either. I began to ask questions quietly. I spoke to guests who were at the wedding, asking what they thought of my mother's call. Their answers were mixed. Some said it was brave, others said it was disruptive. But almost everyone admitted it had changed something, even if they couldn't explain how. The more I learned, the more I felt that this wasn't just a family matter. It was something bigger, something about fairness, respect, and dignity, something that I wanted to understand fully. Then, a week later, I got a call. It was from someone I didn't know. They said they had recorded the call my mother made, that it was going viral online. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to listen, but I couldn't help myself. When I finally heard it, my breath caught. My mother's voice was calm but powerful. She spoke about respect, about treating people with dignity regardless of their wealth or status. She spoke about how mocking someone based on their struggles was not just cruel. It was injustice. I felt tears prick my eyes, not just because of what she said, but because it was exactly what I had never been able to put into words. After the call leaked, everything changed. Messages flooded in. Some were supportive, others were cruel. Some accused her of overstepping, others praised her courage. But the reality was, people were talking, and when people talk, change begins. Then, a few days later, we got a visit. Not from family, but from strangers. A group of people who introduced themselves as activists for fairness and equality. They said they had seen the video and wanted to hear my mother's side of the story. I watched my mother welcome them without hesitation. She spoke openly about what had happened at the wedding, about the laughter that had hurt more than anyone realized. I watched her with a strange mix of pride and fear. She was speaking to strangers about something deeply personal, but she wasn't afraid of speaking. That night, I lay awake thinking. The wedding was over, but the story was far from finished. My mother's call had sparked conversations that would not die quietly, and I realized that her courage had given me something too, the courage to stand for what I believe in. I didn't yet know what I would do with that courage, but I knew I couldn't waste it. Over the next week, the story spread. It reached beyond our neighborhood, beyond our city. It became a story about respect, about injustice, about speaking up when others stay silent. My mother became a voice for something bigger than herself. And somehow, without even saying it, she pulled me into her fight. One afternoon, I found her sitting by the window and looking at her phone. She smiled faintly when she saw me. "You know," she said, "sometimes one voice can feel small, but together they become a storm." Her words stayed with me. I thought about the laughter at the wedding, about the mocking words, about the silence afterward that felt heavier than anything. I thought about the strangers who had come to speak with her, and the people online who were sharing the story. And I realized something. This wasn't just my mother's story anymore. It was ours. That night, I made a decision. I would tell the full story. Every moment, every detail, every feeling. Not just for my mother, but for everyone who had been silenced, mocked, or overlooked. Because some stories aren't meant to be forgotten. They are meant to be told. And this was one of them. That week, everything felt different. The world around me had shifted in a way I couldn't ignore. At school, in the streets, even at home, there was a tension, an unspoken weight. My phone was always buzzing. Messages, videos, comments. Some were supportive. Many were cruel. But they all reminded me that my mother's words were no longer just hers. They had become something much bigger. One afternoon, my phone lit up with a message I couldn't ignore. It was from a number I didn't recognize. No name, just the words. "We need to talk. It's about your mother." My chest tightened instantly. My mind raced. Who would call now? What could it be? I went to meet them at a small cafe near our neighborhood. When I walked in, I saw a man sitting alone in the corner. His face was tired, serious. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "She's being targeted," he said without introduction. "Your mother. People are trying to silence her, to discredit her. They think if they spread lies, they can erase what she said." My stomach sank. I had sensed something like this was coming, but hearing it was a no, their thing entirely. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Because what she said hit a nerve. It's not just about your mother. It's about a system that people want to keep hidden. That wedding, her call, it challenged it. And now, they're scared. It felt unreal, like some invisible storm had been building without me knowing. I wanted to deny it, but deep down, I knew it was true. I had seen the comments online, the sudden backlash, the whispers. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the wedding in my mind, the laughter, the way people had looked at her, the silence after her call, the mix of shame and anger that rippled across the room. And then, the messages started again. This time, not just online, but in person. Strangers stopping me in the street, asking if it was true. Some offering support, others sneering, muttering under their breath. I felt the tension in the air every time I stepped outside. A week later, there was another knock on our door. This time, it was a woman I'd never seen before. She introduced herself as a journalist. She said she wanted to interview my mother about what happened. My mother agreed without hesitation. I watched her speak to the woman, her voice steady, but her eyes carrying a deep weight. She told her story exactly as it happened, without embellishment. Later that night, my mother sat beside me. "You know," she said softly, "this isn't about me. It's about the truth. And truth has a price." Her words hit me hard. I realized she had known this moment was coming, that speaking up meant not just courage, but sacrifice. And somehow, I knew I was going to have to make a choice too. The next day, the story exploded online. News channels picked it up. People were talking about it everywhere, some calling my mother brave, others calling her troublemaker. I watched the flood of comments, the debates, the arguments. The air felt charged, like something was about to happen. Then, late at night, my phone rang. It was an unknown number again. My heart pounded. I answered. On the other side was a voice, low and firm. "If you want this to end, meet me tomorrow, midnight, at the park near the river." I froze. My first instinct was to hang up, but something inside me told me I couldn't. Not now. When I told my mother the next morning, she didn't look surprised. "It's coming," she said. "You need to be ready." That night, the park was quiet, except for the sound of the river flowing. Shadows stretched long under the dim streetlights. My footsteps echoed as I approached the agreed spot. My heart thudded in my chest. Every instinct screamed to turn back. A figure stepped forward from the darkness. I couldn't make out their face, but their voice was calm. "Alec Rose?" I nodded. "Yes." "They want to stop your mother," the voice said. "But not just her. They want to silence this story before it spreads further. They will do whatever it takes." Fear gripped me, but so did something else. Determination. "What do you want from me?" I asked. To stand with her, to tell the truth, publicly. They can't silence everyone. That night, I didn't just walk home. I felt a shift inside me. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with a fire I couldn't put out. My mother's words, the laughter at the wedding, the shame, the courage. It had all led to this moment. The next morning, I told my mother everything. She listened quietly, her eyes holding that same deep calm I'd seen before. "Then it's time," she said. "Time for the world to hear it all." That was the moment I knew. The story was no longer just hers. It was ours, and it was about to reach its breaking point. The morning after that night in the park, the air felt heavier. It wasn't just the heat or the noise of the city. It was something deeper. A sense that something had shifted, that our lives had moved past a point of no return. My mother sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She didn't look up when I entered. I could see her mind was already somewhere else. I pulled up a chair beside her, my heart pounding. "We're going to do it," I said softly. She looked at me then, not with fear, not with doubt, but with a quiet strength that made my chest ache. "Yes," she whispered. "The world needs to know, no matter the cost." That day, we went to the small newsroom the journalist had mentioned. Cameras were set up. Reporters were ready. People who had been following our story for weeks had gathered outside, some with signs, others with questions. The energy was unlike anything I had ever felt, part nervousness, part hope. When my mother stepped forward, she began to speak. Her voice was clear, even though her hands trembled slightly. She told her story again, from the beginning, but this time with the weight of knowing the whole world was listening. She spoke of the laughter, of the humiliation, of the fear, but also of the courage it took to speak up. I watched her, feeling tears prick at my eyes. She wasn't just telling a story, she was making history. And then, she turned to me. Her gaze was steady. "This is Alex's story too now," she said softly. I stepped forward, my voice trembling at first, but growing stronger. I told my own truth. The truth of being her daughter, of living through the shame and the support, of hearing the whispers and feeling the fear. But most of all, of finding my own voice. When we finished, there was silence, then applause. Not just from the crowd outside, but from people around the world who had been watching online. Messages poured in, some full of thanks, others full of anger. But every single one reminded me of one thing: our voices mattered. That night, I sat with my mother on the porch. The city lights twinkled in the distance. She took my hand in hers. "You stood with me," she said quietly. "That's what makes this matter." I looked at her, thinking of everything that had happened. The mocking laughter at the wedding, the call that changed everything, the threats, the fear, and the courage. And I knew she was right. Standing together had changed everything. The story spread beyond our city. News outlets picked it up. Activists began sharing it. People began talking about it in a way they hadn't before. Not just about one family's pain, but about a deeper injustice. But change doesn't come overnight. There were still those who wanted to dismiss us, to silence the truth. Still, every time I saw someone sharing our story, every time someone told me they were inspired to speak out, I felt hope grow. Months later, My mother and I returned to the park where I had met that mysterious voice. The air was cooler now. Autumn leaves drifted along the pavement. We stood in silence for a moment, the sound of the river beside us. "This isn't the end," she said softly. "It's only the beginning." I nodded. I knew she was right. What happened to us wasn't just about a wedding or about mockery. It was about voices being heard, about courage against injustice, about standing up even when it's the hardest thing to do. When I look back now, I realize that day at the wedding was never just about my mother. It was about all of us. The laughter, the shame, the fear, the courage. They became a spark. And sparks can start fires. Fires that can change the world. As I close this chapter of my life, I have one question I carry with me. How many more times will we stand silent before we choose to speak? Because silence changes nothing. And sometimes, a single voice, even trembling, even afraid, can change everything.